Hey there everyone, Stephen here from Redolessence with another review. Yes, I know it's been quite a bit and I do apologize for that. I've just been super busy lately. But this time we have yet another fragrance from the House of Creed. I've already reviewed Millésime Impérial and Virgin Island Water, and this one of course is Original Santal from the niche House of Creed. Original Santal is a fragrance that was composed back in 2005. And it's actually a collaboration between 6th generation Olivier Creed and 7th generation Erwin Creed. I believe this is one of the first, if not the first fragrance that father and son collaborated on, with Virgin Island Water being released in 2007, and of course Aventus being the most recent collaboration released in 2011. Now this is a woody Oriental fragrance for men, mainly because of the sandalwood note and of course the spices like the cinnamon and the coriander. And it does get compared a lot to a few other fragrances in the industry, but on the designer side. So of course we have Joop Homme and Mont Blanc's Individual. And I do see the comparisons. I think Individual is much closer of a comparison as far as the smell goes. Joop Homme, which is one that I actually own, is actually just a bit different, I would say. Joop Homme is a bit more confectionery and on the sweeter side of things, very loud and unapologetic and performs very well, whereas Original Santal is much smoother. So if I could apply a texture to a smell, that's the best way that I could go about describing it, just saying it's a lot smoother and not as loud, although the performance is still there. Now Original Santal is just, you know, I think an exemplification on behalf of the House of Creed that they're always trying to follow the trends that are out and what's popular. And of course there was this whole cultural revolution, if you will, over the note of sandalwood in the fragrance industry. So this is Creed's interpretation of a sandalwood based fragrance, or a fragrance that revolves around the note of sandalwood. And then of course more recently with Royal Oud, which follows the revolution over the note of oud. And I have to say that this is a great interpretation. Now, of course, because of the prior comparisons that I just addressed, there are quite a few people that say that this scent lacks in originality or uniqueness, just because the smell is so similar, and I could kind of see where they're coming from. But again, it's not wholly similar. It's not entirely similar. It's not, you know, my favorite Creed fragrance, although I like it very much. But yes, I do think that it still retains some of that aesthetic merit, just because things, when you look at the composition as a whole and you really pinpoint every individual note that takes part in composing the final result, you really notice that it does have its own, you know, individual aspects that really differentiate and allow this fragrance to stand out from the rest of the competition or from other comparable fragrances. Now, Creed is one of those houses where I don't think, or I'm convinced that they're not satisfied with just releasing a fragrance and saying, you know, we just made this fragrance for the sake of making a fragrance. It feels like everything needs to be dedicated to some body or something, or it needs to commemorate a sort of event. Like Virgin Island Water commemorates the trip that Olivier Creed and Erwin Creed made with a royal couple in the Virgin Islands in the Sir Francis Drake Channel. And then of course you have Aventus, which is dedicated to Napoleon, and then you have Millésime Impérial, which was made for the King of Saudi Arabia and his entire court, or Rofa, which is dedicated to the entire royal family. So this is just another example of that. This is of course dedicated to the country of India. For a number of reasons, of course. The first one being that, of course, India has quite a few spices that are native to that country. And of course one of them being cinnamon, which I think is the star player of this composition, despite the name, Original Santal. Now Santal is of course a French word and it translates to sandalwood. And yes, there is a great deal of sandalwood in this fragrance, and I believe the reason why it is used in this fragrance is because it is also native to India. It's cultivated in Asia, of course, quite a bit. With India being in Asia, there is a city within India called Mysore. And Mysore sandalwood is one of the most precious ingredients, and it's actually quite pricey just because of the scarcity of the raw material. So over-cultivation has actually made it scarce. So if you're ever looking for a reason to justify the price of this particular Creed fragrance, I would say if it does indeed utilize you know, the natural Mysore sandalwood, then, you know, I would say that that's a pretty good reason, and I'm inclined to believe that, you know, they do use the natural raw sandalwood note, just being that with a history of many Creed fragrances, they are known to use very natural ingredients, especially if you see the name millésime on the label, which means that they use the best of the best from that year's harvest. This is not one of them, but of course Tabaron, Imperial, those have the millésime label attributed to them. But nevertheless, I'll talk a little bit more about the smell later on, but next up we have the presentation for Original Santal by Creed. Here we have the presentation for Original Santal by Creed. There's a pretty funny story surrounding this particular bottle of Original Santal. I bought this from the mall by my house, from a perfume store on the first floor that I actually shop at quite frequently. So I know the guy who works there, he knows me. I buy from him on a regular basis, and he usually gives me very good deals on fragrances. And I walked in there one day and I inquired as to whether or not he had this particular fragrance. So he puts this box on the counter, and of course the first thing that I do whenever I buy any Creed in store is I look at the bottom of the box to see what the batch number is, just because of that variation from batch to batch. So I looked at the bottom of the box, and to my surprise, the batch number, or half of it, is actually cut out. So the only thing that you can read is A41. At this point, I became very curious and concerned as to why the person would cut half of the batch number out of the sticker. So of course that prompted me to remove the bottle from the box and look at the backside on the rim where the batch number is also printed, and it turns out that it's scratched off. So again, the only thing that you can see is A41. At this point, I became very suspicious. I started to doubt that the product was authentic, and when I shared my suspicions with the guy, you know, he was very apologetic, and he also didn't know why something like that would happen, and he confirmed that he wasn't the one who did that, and he just received it that way. And he actually talked me down to just $100 for a 4-ounce flask. So at that point, I knew I had to buy it, and I knew that that was an offer that I couldn't refuse. But again, you know, I was concerned as to why somebody would do that. So that prompted me to conduct a bit of research, and it came to my realization that when a fragrance gets sold to a secondhand independent dealer via a black market transaction, the serial number will actually be scratched off and cut out, so that the product cannot be traced back to where it originated from. So that's a means of pretty much covering the seller's behind. So it's something that the seller does. But nevertheless, the product is authentic. It just indicates and suggests that there is some shady activity going on behind the scenes. But you know, it's kind of a funny story for Fragcom, but now I don't know what batch of Original Santal I had. But maybe you guys could help me out. Anyway, as far as the box goes, this beautiful, I believe it to be a sticker, but it does not look cheaply manufactured. Right on the front of the box, in this reflective type of finish, you have the Creed crest on the top, also in this lustrous silver finish that looks really nice. The cardstock is actually pretty thick on the box, and that looks nice too. And of course the Creed logo encompasses the entire perimeter of the box. You have this legible, also lustrous silver writing on the back, and you already know the information on the bottom. On the inside, you have this cardstock with 1st generation James Henry Creed, 6th generation Olivier Creed, and of course the detail in the picture frame also confirms the authenticity of the product. Now the box also comes with this nice little pamphlet folded in fifths with a brief history of the Creed house written in 4 languages. On inauthentic versions, this will actually be folded vertically in half. You don't get this little margin here on the right, so be wary of that. And there are also variations out there where the history of the Creed house is written entirely in Arabic. Doesn't mean your product isn't authentic, just suggests that it may be an international variation, so please be mindful of that as well. As far as the bottle goes, you have the beautiful Creed crest in the cap of the box here. It actually looks really nice, a lot of detail in there. On the cap itself, actually it has a second plastic lining on the inside, which allows it to fit into the bottle pretty snugly. The atomizer, of course, is a Creed atomizer, and it works exceptionally well. The bottle has this beautiful transition from red to clear, which is kind of evocative of the Fahrenheit bottles by Dior, but it does look quite different in a way. You have the name of the fragrance down at the bottom, the name of the house at the top here, and another surefire way of really confirming whether your product is authentic or not is by removing the atomizer And if you have a white ring on the inside as opposed to a black one, that pretty much confirms that it's real. I know some counterfeit green Irish tweeds on the market have a black ring. So please be mindful of that. And I really hope that this video clears up any concerns that some other people in the community may have. But for the most part, that was the presentation for Original Santal by Creed. Now, as far as the smell for this fragrance goes, I'm pretty sure that your favorite YouTube fragrance reviewer has already covered this fragrance. And for the most part, everything that I see on YouTube is pretty valid, and I agree with most of it. But I've just been wearing this fragrance so much recently, especially since I do think it's geared a little more toward the colder weather, because it does perform pretty well in the cold, for a Creed fragrance that is, that I feel like now, because I've worn it so much, I can accurately assess not only the performance but the smell as well. So just to throw in my 2 cents in there, but for the most part, everything else that's been said on YouTube about this fragrance is pretty accurate, and I could validate it for sure. Now, I did apply it on my hand now about 30 to 35 minutes ago, so I would say that I'm probably in the mid as far as the fragrance's development goes. And okay, yeah, definitely. One thing that's, you know, pretty consistent from the opening of the fragrance to the mid is that cinnamon note. In the opening, the cinnamon is very concentrated. And you know what, I think that that's the one thing that really allows comparisons to be made between this fragrance and Yop Homme, this fragrance and Mont Blanc's Individual. Although I do think that Individual and Original Santal are much more alike than Original Santal and Yop Homme are. I just think that the opening of Yop Homme is just sickly sweet, it's confectionery, it's, you know, pretty strong, and it does perform very well for a fragrance of its concentration. But I think it's just that cinnamon note that really allows all these comparisons to be made. In this fragrance, however, especially considering the name Original Santal, that's an indication that there is a prominent sandalwood note in this fragrance. Do I think it's stronger than the cinnamon note? No, definitely not. But I do think that the two work together very well and are blended very well. It feels like the sandalwood note is constantly trying to take center stage, but the cinnamon note just does not allow it. And the cinnamon note persists, like I said, very well into the mid of the fragrance. The sandalwood note, however, I think is what adds that smooth, creamy texture to this composition. In the opening, you have a coriander note, which of course is a spice, and it's one of the notes in the composition that pays homage to the country of India. Fortunately, it's not very heavily concentrated, or not from what I am able to perceive with my nose, so it doesn't give this fragrance a culinary sense, so that's a good thing. And I think it adds a bit of sharpness to the opening. Now, that sharpness attributed to the coriander is fleeting, so you're not going to expect not to smell it for more than half an hour. 25 minutes to a half an hour, that coriander note is gone. Yeah, I certainly can't smell any of it, and I've had it on my hand now for about a half hour to 35 minutes. The cinnamon note sticks around, sandalwood note sticks around, and you also get the gourmand elements coming to play in the dry down. You get vanilla, tonka bean, and of course you also have a little bit of sweetness from the cinnamon note, a spicy sweetness. I don't think that the vanilla ever comes across loud and clear. I'm able to smell the tonka bean much more than I'm able to smell the vanilla, which is a bit strange because I think on Fragrantica, according to user votes, users voted that the cinnamon note is a bit stronger. I don't get too much of it, and you know, I can usually pick up on vanilla when it's used in fragrances. Yeah, for some reason I'm just not getting too much of it. No citrus elements in this composition, although there is a juniper berry note in here. Now, I have to confess that I really don't get the juniper berry note. I do get a fruit note. And, you know, there's so much sweetness going on in this fragrance just because it utilizes all these other gourmand elements. And I would have to say that even though I've smelled other fragrances utilizing a juniper berry note, I am not able to specifically and explicitly pinpoint the juniper berry in this particular composition. I do get a mild fruit note, which I am led to believe, or I expect it to be that juniper berry note. It's just that, you know, I confess I don't have too much experience with juniper berry to really, you know, attribute it to that particular note, but I do get a mild fruity nuance or an overtone in this fragrance. I'm just led to believe that it may very well be that juniper berry note. And surprisingly enough, I wouldn't have known this until I looked up the formal note breakdown of this fragrance, and even more so until a friend of mine brought this to my attention. But there's a lavender note in this fragrance that I think is blended very well. And it's funny because when I let a friend of mine smell this for the very first time, she told me that the first note she was able to pick up on was that lavender note. And right away I was like, no, you're wrong. You know, I don't think there's lavender in this. And then even when I smelled it for the first time, I wouldn't get that lavender note. And when I looked up the note breakdown, that pretty much confirmed my friend's suspicions that there is indeed that note in this composition. And now every time I smell it, it's like I'm trying to extract it or pinpoint it, and she was very, very right about it. But again, with Creed fragrances, it just smells so natural that, you know, it's blended very well, and it's not offensive, and it's not used in that synthetic way that you would expect a lavender note to smell in like a plug-in or a room air freshener. It's done so well, and I think it complements all the other ingredients or notes in this fragrance. But it's certainly not as concentrated as some of the other notes are, like the sandalwood and the cinnamon, and it becomes more evident as the fragrance dries down. So the most concentrated notes, of course, are again the cinnamon and the sandalwood. As it dries down, I get more tonka bean than I do vanilla. I know a few other ingredients are listed, like ginger. I gotta be honest with you guys, I don't get any ginger from this. Maybe because, you know, I don't think it's a volatile ingredient, or maybe just because it's slightly concentrated, but I really don't get too much ginger from this. I don't get any at all. No, not at all for that matter, but I think the tonka bean is a star player in the dry down of this fragrance, which of course is a gourmand element, and those allow this fragrance to be used in night out scenarios, and this is an excellent contender to fit that bill. But anyway, that's it as far as the smell goes for Original Santal. Next up we have the rating for Original Santal by Creed. As far as the rating goes, first up we have uniqueness and overall smell, and this fragrance earned from me a 7 out of 10. One of the reasons why I couldn't really justify giving this fragrance a higher mark is because Yop Homme and Mont Blanc's Individuel, the two other fragrances that this one gets compared to, actually preceded it. They came out before Original Santal came out, and I do get the similarities in the smell, so that to me it mildly takes away from the aesthetic nature or the aesthetic merit of this fragrance. And not to say that this one is a copycat. No, not by any means, because this one is its own fragrance and I can pinpoint the differences, and I actually prefer this one to the other two. But just because that smell has been done before, and this one does bear some striking similarities, I couldn't give it a 10 out of 10 per se, but a 7 out of 10 in my book is still a very good rating, and I appreciate this one for being its own unique interpretation of a sandalwood based fragrance, just utilizing the note of cinnamon. But anyway, 7 out of 10 for uniqueness and overall smell. Next up we have longevity. This one also earned a 7 out of 10 from me. This is an eau de parfum concentration, so I was expecting 6 to 8 hours. It feels like with me, even though this fragrance does perform very well, and it actually performs very well for a Creed fragrance, it may just be a personal thing and because I have dry skin or whatnot, but on my skin, it seems like even on a good day, the most I'll get out of this fragrance is 6 hours. So I ended up giving it a 7 out of 10 for longevity, but as far as projection goes, I gave it an 8 out of 10. This one actually projects very well. It seems like even with 2 or 3 sprays, people are still going to be able to pick up on the fact that you're wearing this fragrance, and it's not at all necessary for close encounter scenarios. I would say it projects for about an arm's length for a good 2 hours. It's after that 2-hour mark that it starts to sit closer to the skin, and then if you find yourself in a close encounter or a romantic scenario where there won't be a considerable distance between you and the next person, then this one fits the bill perfectly, because it kind of lures or, you know, draws the other person closer to you. It's that type of a fragrance. But very well done as far as projection goes, slightly better than the longevity. Longevity, I would say, is average. This one is above average. Next up we have versatility, and again I brought it down to a 7 out of 10. This is marketed as a men's fragrance. To me it's very unisex. You know, I think that the sweetening or the gourmand elements, the cinnamon, tonka bean, and the vanilla, are very androgynous, so they can be pulled off by either gender. As far as social scenarios go, I think this one is a perfect night out fragrance. As far as semi-formal and formal occasions, I think that there are so many other fragrances, especially from the House of Creed, like Green Irish Tweed, Aventus, Royal Oud, Millésime Impérial. Those fragrances would work very well in a suit and tie, that this one, for me at least, is reserved more for night out occasions. A party, a club, a bar, a friend's house, even casual scenarios. Semi-formal and formal occasions, there are other fragrances that I think would fit the bill far better than this one does. And as far as temperature conditions, I think this one is geared more toward the colder weather, but I suppose you could wear it on a cool spring or summer night. But because it's one of the better performing Creed fragrances, I would be more inclined to wear this in the colder weather. So a 7 out of 10 for versatility. And last up we have presentation. Already told you, even with my funny story, what I feel about that. So I gave it a 10 out of 10. Again, the atomizer is exceptional. The bottle looks very, very nice with that transition from red to white. And the packaging is gorgeous despite the fact that it doesn't have a plastic wrap on it. But the batch variation could be off-putting to some. Just that inconsistency for a house that's been out for so many years, a little more than 250 years, is surprising. But again, you do have reformulation, so I guess, you know, one company may have the reformulations, this company has the batch variations, and you know, anyway, the presentation is still very, very nice despite that fact. So that earns this fragrance an overall mark, or an average score, of 7.8 out of 10. So there you have it. That was my review of Original Santal by Creed. Thank you so much for watching. As always, please don't forget to comment, rate, and subscribe. It would be greatly appreciated. If you'd like, please join my Facebook group, Redolessence Reviews. I will leave a link down in the description section below, so please do that if you'd like. As always, thank you so much for watching. This has been Steven with another fragrance review from Redolessence. Thanks again, and accessorize accordingly.